Hello, everyone. So may the peace, mercy, and blessings of God be with all of you today. Today, I am joined by Sulaiman Charles Neave. He accepted Islam in October 2002 at the East London Mosque and is currently 44 years old. He is originally from Melbourne, but lived in London from 2001 till 2019 and is now back in Melbourne. He is a teacher and was a Deputy Headmaster in London, and he currently works as an education consultant. Alongside a few brothers, Sulaiman started an educational charity known as the Nida Trust, which aims to call communities together and improve the opportunities for young Muslims. For those wanting to know more information about this organisation, please check out www.nidatrust, and for Nelly, I-D for dog, trust.org.uk. And this educational charity has worked with many Muslim teachers and schools. Additionally, they run youth programs and organise many trips overseas, including to countries like Turkey, South Africa, Qatar, and the Netherlands. So, without further ado, Sulaiman, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. May peace be with you too. So it's nice having you on our show. So let's get started with our first question then. So the first thing I have for you is, how did you come to embrace Islam?
Well, it was back in 2002, and I actually had moved to London at the end of 2001, and I worked in a school in inner East London in Whitechapel. Mm-hmm. And pretty much every single student at the school was Bangladeshi. So 98% Bangladeshi, which meant the school was pretty much all Muslim, and there would be lunchtime prayers and quite a really nice big Friday prayer as well, even though it was a state school. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I was quite new in London and I didn't know that many people. And I got to know many of the students, and they were so welcoming and so interesting, actually. And they said, "You should come to the mosque, sir. You should check it out, sir," all that sort of thing. And I was just really interested. I was interested in seeing it and finding out more about Islam. Because honestly, when I lived in Australia, in Melbourne, even though I went to uni and everything, I couldn't have told you in 1999 the difference between a mosque and a Hindu temple. You know, I don't think I would have known the difference. Honestly, I was that ignorant. So when suddenly there was these really welcoming, lovely people who were saying, you know, come and find out about it, I was genuinely interested. And there was staff as well at the school who were saying that, youth workers, you know, really interesting people who were working within that same community. So I went along to the East London Mosque. I talked to quite a few of the brothers there as well. In the end, I met my future brother-in-law at that time as well, who's also a convert brother. So you know, met him. He talked to me a lot about Islam and about, you know, the main beliefs. And I saw that it actually really connected with who I was. And it really made me realize that in many ways, I think most of my beliefs were Muslim already. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, so I think at that point I made the decision to do my Shahada, but I still went away. I read a translation of the Quran. I talked to more people about it. I didn't sort of jump into it because I thought, if I'm going to make this decision, it's got to be serious. It can't just be some fad, you know, some little phase. I wanted it to mean something. So in the end, I took my Shahada in October, and subhanAllah, it was actually the day I took my Shahada, the day after the Bali bombings. So it was quite difficult. Yeah, it was quite difficult because I took my Shahada. I then emailed a lot of my contacts on my email address list saying, actually, I'm now a Muslim. I just wanted people to know. And then the Bali bombings had just happened. So, of course, you can imagine how many questions I got from many of my contacts in Australia saying, why have you done this? What does this mean? Do you agree with these people? So that was quite challenging at the time. But I've never regretted it. And the connection I felt to sort of a greater being, to Allah, to God, and also the connection I felt to the community has sustained me throughout many difficult times since then.
Okay. Wow. No, that's beautiful. So it's been now, I think, about 18 years.
It 17 and a bit. I can't believe, I remember talking, as I said, to my future brother-in-law back then. Yeah. And he said to me then, "Oh, I've been a Muslim for 15 years or 18 years then," because he became a Muslim in the sort of late 1980s, I think, early 1990s, when he was at university. And I remember thinking then, oh, wow, I can't imagine having been a Muslim for 15 years. He said to me at that time, he said he'd managed to get through almost one full cycle of Ramadans, as in throughout the year.
Uh-huh.
So he'd done the really long summers and the long fasts that you get in London. You know, in London, you
Oh,
fast from
yeah.
3 a.m. till 10 o'clock at night. That's your fast because of the daylight hours. I think it's even 2:40 a.m. actually. It's even slightly earlier. And so he'd done those ones. But when I became a Muslim, Ramadan was December. So the day was like 8 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It was easy. I thought this is not hard. Why are people complaining?
Like, wow. We have it very easy in Australia compared to that, I have to say.
Yeah, it's sort of pretty consistent here. It's a little bit more
Yeah.
consistent. But in England, you get these real extremes, and so
Oh,
he'd been a Muslim for many, many years, and he actually worked at the East London Mosque as well. He still does. He's still there,
mhm.
and so he was a great contact to know. And that mosque, I don't know if people are listening know of it, but it's this big mosque just near Whitechapel Station. It's actually been in operation since 1901, I think, when the Bangladeshi sailors originally set it up, because Whitechapel's pretty close to the docks, where the docks used to be, where the Canary Wharf business district is now in London. And so they set the mosque up way back then. And since then, it's moved buildings a few times, moved sites, but now there's a big purpose-built mosque, and they will get, 2, 3, 4,000 people to Friday prayer every week.
Wow.
You know, for Eid, I think it's more like 20,000 people because they have a number of sittings. So it's a really, really big, really brilliant mosque. It does lots of work in the community too, like employment, helping people find employment, drugs, counseling, all of those sort of problems that often occur in inner cities are very much in that community. And they do a lot of work to try and assist people, Muslims and non-Muslims actually, with all of their programs. So it was a great place to be involved with when I was first a Muslim, because there was this really cool environment that helped me sort of really find myself and understand what it was like within that. And I suppose that's, if anybody was considering becoming a Muslim, I think that is a really important thing, is to try and find a community that you can, ask advice from and have a nice chat to, and share a meal with. I think that's really important. If you try and do it by yourself, it'll end up being more like a phase where you just try it for a bit and then you go off and do something else. Whereas if you've got friends supporting you around you, it makes things just so much easier.
Yeah, that's actually so interesting that you talk about, the commute. Like, I can't imagine 2,000 to 3,000, especially in Melbourne, because I feel like here it's still a growing community. And, it's still like the first generation, majority of them. And so I find it very interesting. And I hope, down the track in a few more generations, like inshallah, like God willing, hopefully we have these big communities as well that are extremely supportive and understanding of the scenarios and the situations in the community.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because there are places in Australia and some parts of Melbourne that do already have these really long-term communities.
Okay.
The Albanian mosque, which is in Carlton, that's been there since the 1950s. And that's a community where many of the Muslims now are fourth generation.
Oh,
so
wow.
they're actually, they're same with some Lebanese, some of the Lebanese community in Sydney as well, the Lebanese Muslims. I was reading some really interesting literature the other day about how there's fifth generation Australian Muslims with Lebanese heritage living in Sydney, which is pretty incredible. These are people whose grandparents haven't even been to Lebanon, but they still identify themselves as Lebanese Muslims because their great grandparents actually originally came from there. So, and you go to Broken Hill. I was in Broken Hill the other day as part of my work, and well, not the other day because it's locked down about 6 months ago now. but there's on the corner in Broken Hill, there's still an Afghani bakery. Which was originally established, and a Quran and prayer mat shop, like you get next to mosques, in the middle of this Australian country town, literally in the middle of nowhere. And that was established originally by some of the camel traders who used to live in that area 120, 130 years ago. So there is a great culture, not to mention all of the contact of Muslims had in the north of Australia, places like Broome and those sorts of things. But there is a great history of Islam in Australia. And I think it's important that we remember that. We don't always, and non-Muslims don't always think, oh, the Muslim community, they're all the freshies, you know, they're all the people who've just arrived in the country.
I thought so as well. So it's really interesting to hear this different side of the story where, it's actually not like that. So thank you for letting me know, and thank you for letting the audience know as well, because I was of the opposite impression. So it's really interesting.
I felt really ignorant. I remember when I was chatting to a couple of people from a couple of Muslims from South Africa, and they were saying that they were Muslims from South Africa, and they looked a little bit Malay from Southeast Asia. And I sort of said, "Oh, you're from South Africa, but you know, where are you really from?" You know, that question that everybody hates, and we shouldn't ask. And they said, "We are from South Africa." And they explained to me that about 400 years ago, the elements of the British Empire brought many Muslims from Southeast Asia or 350 years ago, I think, to South Africa. And back then they were brought pretty much as indentured labor. And one man, I can't remember his name, I wish I could, had memorized the Quran. And he wrote out the whole Quran from memory and established a mosque and had that Quran that he wrote from memory as the major Quran. And that's still available. You can still go and see it. I think it's in an exhibition now in South Africa. And they were from that community. So their community of Muslims had been in South Africa for 100 years more than, say, white people had been here in Australia. So to sort of say, oh, you're really from Malaysia, of course they're not. They are through and through South Africans, you know, but they are Muslims. So it's quite interesting how, we see the world in that way. And I was definitely guilty of that when I met them as well.
Oh, I think I would have been in your place. I would have probably thought the same as well. So it's definitely, really important to educate ourselves. And I should probably look into the Muslim history in Australia a lot more now. Like, I was familiar with the whole camel trade thing in Australia like hundreds of years ago, but that's as far as my Muslim history in Australia extends. So thank you so much for enlightening me on that. I really appreciate it. So moving on from that, so now we're sort of going back into your journey as a Muslim. So looking back on your life when you first accepted Islam, is there anything you would have done differently during the initial stages of your journey?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think I probably would have maybe judged myself and judged others less. I think when you first become a Muslim, you're a little bit judgmental about others and the way that they choose to live, and maybe about yourself as well. Maybe you're like, I'm not a proper Muslim if I do this, if I don't do that, if I do, And I think I actually moved to Kuwait when I was in 2007, worked in an international school there for a couple of years. Okay. And when I was in Kuwait, I think to have the experience of living in a Muslim country was really important to me. Because then I suddenly saw there's all these different types of Muslims, and it doesn't matter. You just need to do the best you can do as a human being and a Muslim. That's the key point, to be a good person. And all of those practices of Islam, they are to help you to be that good person. If you pray 5 times a day, you are a much more focused, nicer, politer person is my true belief, because you're falling still 5 times a day. You're connecting with something much bigger than yourself 5 times a day. It's meditative. You're repeating something 5 times a day. So these practices are there to help us to be a good person. Yes. So if you focus on that end goal, I think that's what I learned. That's what's really, really important. And judging others about whether they're doing the practices or not, or even judging yourself about whether you're following the practice well enough or not, is not as beneficial as focusing on the end goal and understanding that the practices are to get to that end goal.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you in the sense how all the rules, like, even though it seems like Islam has so many rules, and it seems that on the surface Islam seems so hard, but actually these laws don't increase the power of God in any way. They don't increase the greatness of him, but rather it is us that finds peace by following these laws.
Yeah.
And it benefits us at the end of the day. It benefits God in no way. It just benefits us.
Yeah,
I find that so amazing.
But that's why God wants us to do it, because he knows
Exactly.
it benefits us. Yeah. And I think, I mean, that's beautifully put, actually. I couldn't have put it better. That's great.
Thank you.
But that's what it's all about. And I think people who, when introduced to Islam, focus on what you're not allowed to do or what you can do, are sort of missing the point. It's about living a good life. And these things have been set down to help you do that.
Exactly.
And, if you don't drink alcohol, you do live a better life, whether you want to admit it or not. It's true, And I think, and when you pray and even the experience, if people haven't done it, if they're non-Muslim, but the experience of fasting is really, a tremendous experience when it comes to. Yes, it develops your discipline, but there is a great feeling of elation as well when you do it. It's a terrific thing to do. So there's a lot, there's so many things in the so-called rules that are there for our benefit and that do actually genuinely benefit us. So I would say, when I first became a Muslim, I don't think I quite got that. I think it was much more about, I have to follow these rules now because I'm a Muslim, So that's what I would change. Is just that understanding, but maybe that comes with time.
It definitely seems that it's literally just a matter of time before you understand it, you appreciate it, you learn the why rather than in the beginning it seems like you're just learning how to do this, how to do that, but over time when you know how to do the how, then you start to really reflect on it and you start to learn, why am I actually doing this? And I think that's when you gain that deeper appreciation.
Yeah, this is the Western education system again, you see? This is the problem.
That's true.
Because the Western education system teaches you that you have to have some sort of hypothesis of the why before you do your experiment. This is started in Germany in the Enlightenment in the 1780s, 1790s, Immanuel Kant, all of those guys. And this idea was you've got to come up with an idea which is a sort of a hypothesis, and then you test that hypothesis. And actually, Islam is, and if you go back to medieval ages, all religions, Christianity, all of these, Hinduism, all of these religions are the opposite way around. You do the practice first, and it's through doing the practice that you come up with your own reason as to the why. You start to feel why. So it's not so-called empirical proof. It doesn't exist in faith. It's about doing it first and then having the experience first. And once you've had the experience, then you can actually start, like you said, explaining to yourself the why, which is important to us as human beings. But we shouldn't be speculating until we've tried it. I think that's the key point.
Yeah. No, that's actually really well put. It's a really good way of thinking of it. I hadn't thought of it in that way. That's really good. Thank you. All right. And now, so to wrap up this interview, my last question for you is, what advice would you give to people interested in looking into Islam?
As I said, I think, and that is great. That follows on from my last answer. You've come to Islam through a lot of study, from what you were saying to me earlier, that it was very much about studying Islam and then making a decision.
Yes.
I think in some ways that's almost the way I wouldn't recommend people to do it.
Okay.
I think do a little bit of study, and then if it feels right, just make the decision and do it, and then experience it from the inside as a Muslim. Because I think the more study you do, the more likely it is that you're going to find differing opinions constantly, and then those differing opinions are going to end up worrying you, and then you're going to end up sort of confused, and it's going to be almost more difficult. So I would say, look, if it's something that you're already thinking about, it shows that you're already interested. Maybe do a tiny bit more reading, have a look at what it means and how it feels, and then just go for it. And then, as I said right at the start, make sure you're sort of connected to some sort of community that will support you. I think if you get those two things, I had the East London Mosque, but then once with Nida Trust, with those brothers I met, they actually weren't in the East London Mosque. They used to go every now and again because it's such a big one. But I met Faisal. He actually came up to me when I was praying in a mosque, waited, finished, and he said, "Oh, nice to meet you," because I think because I was white, I stuck out a bit. So he was like, "Nice to meet you. So who are you?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm Sulaiman. I'm a teacher." So I'm a teacher too. We should start a trust together. I'm thinking about, honestly, he was that direct. And so I sort of also had this other little community of the Nida Trust brothers, which was really diverse. East London Mosque is still mainly Bangladeshi, whereas this Nida Trust brothers were from everywhere. So I got to eat awesome African food, and it was great, So because of that, because of that, I think that community also really helped. So that'd be the two things. Don't overthink it, would be my first advice. Yes. And my second advice is make sure there's people there to support you.
I completely agree with you. The do not overthink. Definitely, I felt that was one of my major struggles. It was overthinking. But yeah, at the end of the day, it was literally just a matter of, I believed in a God. You ask God for guidance and ask God for the strength to actually follow through with that guidance. Because it's one thing to know that something you believe is a truth, but then it's another story, like, do you have the strength to actually, go through with it and actually embrace it? So, yeah. And I feel like sometimes we just make it so hard for ourselves. And we're like, what if this happens? What if that happens? And, everything like that. So I like the way you've put it, definitely.
Yeah, it's like those Dr. Pepper ads a few years ago. What's the worst that can happen? Just do it. And then look in a few months, if it's really not for you, oh well, but I think what you'll find is that once you do it and you actually start following some of the practices and you've got a community that supports you, I don't think you will think that, I really don't. So I think that's the journey. You just got to dive in and see what happens.
Yeah, no, definitely. Awesome advice. Thank you so much. Talking about, the Muslim community and community in general. So, and this is what the Nida Trust basically specializes in. So what actually motivated you to start the Nida Trust?
Well, brother Faisal and brother Baba and I were all school teachers in London, working at really well-resourced government, state schools. And back then, that was sort of 2004, 2005. Tony Blair was the Prime Minister of England, and he'd pumped loads of money into the schooling system. So actually state schools were, had all the latest computers, had fantastic buildings, all these new buildings were going up. And we looked at the independent Muslim schools that were around our local area, which was in East London, Whitechapel, Hackney. And they were so under-resourced. They were often paying teachers far, far less than, say, what a state school could pay. So therefore, most of their teachers weren't actually trained teachers. They were more sort of graduates who'd come from university and were going to help out the school because maybe they knew a family member in it. So the teachers really lacked training. They were incredibly well-intentioned, and it was brilliant to see how hard they worked, but often they just didn't have the training or the knowledge to be really effective teachers. And so what does that mean? It means that the students, the children, were disadvantaged. And we were in these really well-resourced public schools, and we were getting loads of training, loads of extra training. And I remember saying to Faisal, saying to Baba, look, why don't we basically go to these trainings and take notes, write down everything they say, and then we can go into some of these Muslim schools and deliver the training to them for free. And so that's how it started. It started with us teacher training. I remember I was supporting an English department at a little girls' school in East London called Madani. We were doing lots of training for all their teachers in classroom management, behavior management, lesson structure, lesson planning, curriculum planning, all those sorts of things that you would learn in a graduate diploma of education that many of these teachers hadn't done. So that's how it started. And then it mushroomed, then we started a youth program. And so we worked with a lot of the youth of that area as well. We then started this Muslim Teachers Network, which is still going on today. We started the Muslim school leaders forum, which basically gets lots of principals and deputy principals, school leaders all together from Muslim schools to talk about their problems, to share best practice, to talk about sharing resources, those sorts of things. We started that back then too, and that's still running many years later, 15 years later. So we've been, alhamdulillah, we've been really pleased with how the trust has gone. On top of that, you mentioned the tours. So we've got some good contacts in Turkey and South Africa and Holland. So we've organized a few tours for people. We've got funding to do a few tours. So we took community leaders to Istanbul and to Ankara, where they got to go on a cultural tour and meet lots of the community leaders over there in Turkey. We did a tour to Durban in South Africa for school leaders, where we went and had a look at some of the Muslim schools in South Africa and how they were run. Similarly, we did that same sort of thing to Turkey and to the Netherlands as well, taking school leaders to see Muslim schools in different countries. It just opens people's minds a little bit. I think, you end up running it in England, the British way. And so to go and see how they're doing something in Turkey or South Africa or in Holland, you think, oh, maybe I could do it in a slightly different way. Maybe I could try something slightly different. So that was really beneficial. Yeah, I think people enjoy the tours. They were the big name events. But actually, a lot of the work that we did at Nida Trust was that just general work every week, making sure we're connecting people, making sure that they know how to access any support that they might need, whether that's directly from us or putting them in contact with government contacts or those sorts of things. Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. So, in trying to bring the Muslim community together and building these contacts, what are some of the challenges that you faced?
Well, I think non-Muslims will always see the Muslim community in this monolithic way, that they're all Muslims, they're one thing. And the one thing you realize when you become a Muslim is actually that's just so not true. The Muslim community is incredibly diverse, which is a nice way of saying it. Disparate is perhaps the more negative way of saying it. And that means that, there are a lot of Muslim groups that don't even talk to each other. And because they're perhaps a little bit too judgmental, maybe they sort of say they're not real Muslims, they're not doing it in the right way, the way I would believe, but that's being harsh. I think a lot of them are it's more, they are comfortable with their community. You'll see that going down in cultural lines. That's particularly evident, I think, here in Australia, where most of the mosques will be linked to a particular country or culture. So you'll go to a Lebanese mosque, you'll go to an Albanian mosque, or you'll go to a Turkish mosque. And that's sometimes where the funding has come from. It's come from the home country, but then it's the cultural expression within that mosque. So a Turkish mosque will have, beautiful mosaics because that's what they do in Turkey, and it's lovely to see. But that's not necessarily connecting with, say, a Bangladeshi or an Indian Muslim who might want to have, slightly different food for breaking their fast in Ramadan, or different sites, different traditions. So it's exactly the same in London. And it meant that a lot of these Muslim schools initially weren't supporting each other because they were just very disconnected. So as an organization with, Faisal is a Bangladeshi of origin, born in Bangladesh, came over here when he was a kid. Baba has Pakistani parents. He was born in Britain, but with Pakistani parents. I was Australian. And we also actually had a few members from the African community as well, Somali community, who were as part of the trust as well, a couple of other Pakistani brothers. And one of our chairs is Turkish. So we had formed an organization already that had lots of very different people. And we thought, this is our mission. We want to have an organization that doesn't go along with one particular school of thought or understanding of Islam, that's in no way judgmental. It just brings people together initially for the good of children, for the good of education, but as we developed as a trust, for the good of the whole community. So for example, the community leaders tour that we took to Istanbul in, I think it was October 2018, we took 32 community leaders, and they were from some of the most diverse mosques from around all of the UK. So we had a sort of what you would describe as an Indian Sufi imam alongside an Arabic Salafi. For non-Muslims out there, that's more like really conservative, Orthodox type of Muslim, alongside actually another conservative Orthodox, but in a very different way. And yet they were sat next to each other on the coach journey from Ankara to Istanbul, laughing, joking, talking. And I remember Brother Faisal and I just looking at this bus of people all enjoying each other's company, often disagreeing about things. That's cool. You can disagree, but in a really respectful way, and then finding points of agreement and, having these great fruitful conversations. And we were thinking, this is what Nida Trust means. It's about calling all of these communities together. When we started, we also did quite a few interfaith events as well in Hackney with the Christian and the Jewish communities there. So we also did quite a lot of that, sort of linking communities together. But the more work we did, the more we realized that actually even within the Muslim community, we had to put in the hours to get people talking to each other and working with each other and sharing things with each other. And that sort of became our mission.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with you on the one thing I've noticed, especially since embracing Islam for the past few months, it's just sometimes it can seem like there's so much disunity within the Muslim community, and it's really great to see such an organization that's trying to sort of bridge those gaps together. I feel like this is a long time coming, and definitely, something we need in times where we really have to band together. I find that really interesting.
And sometimes it is a little bit about ignoring differences and concentrating on what's similar, and not just focusing on the differences. But as I said, with these community leaders, we didn't just ignore things. They had debates, theological debates about things that they profoundly disagreed with. And then they finished the debate and they hadn't talked each other into anything. They had still disagreed. But then they went and had dinner together, and they could agree on how lovely the food was, and they could agree on the beauty of the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, and they could agree on other aspects. So there was so much more to agree on than there was to disagree. And I think it's about focusing on that. You don't have to give up your own principles. If you don't have to give up your own beliefs, and mold yourself to somebody else's understanding of Islam. You can be who you want to be, but you just have to respect that other people will also want to be Muslim, but in a slightly different way. And you have to respect their right to be like that, and focus on what you agree with. And that was nice. Honestly, we had people from the Norwich Sufi mosque, which is, quite famous. And that's a very, one would say, a very liberal mosque. So, often men and women will pray together, and I think maybe even some of the leaders of the mosque, not to make any judgments, but I think some of the leaders of the mosque may still drink alcohol. So a lot of people would, from the outside, look at that and say, "Oh, but they're not real Muslims." And yet we had them, as I said, along with this conservative imam who would be seen as the Salafi, like a Saudi Arabian Muslim, along with this Sufi Muslim from India. So again, really traditional beliefs. And they were all able to discuss things in a really productive and interesting way. And I think that was great to see, because that really warmed the hearts. And it was a similar thing in education. It's crazy if you've got two schools and one has had funding to buy brilliant computers and the other one hasn't, why doesn't the school with the computers share them at some point? And even if that's with a school or an organization that has slightly different views about Islam, but they're still a Muslim school, that's fine. They're still children. Those children need the access to the computers. That's what's important, not what the theological understanding about, when to pray Asr. That's not what is important.
No, definitely. It's an amazing thing, what you guys are doing, and inshallah, God willing, this continues to be a successful venture, and it spreads all throughout the world, because it's definitely great to see, because when you can see the leaders getting along, then that also translates to the community. Whereas I find sometimes, especially with the media portrayal and everything, when you see the leaders against each other, that sometimes triggers communities to also be against each other. So, it's nice to see that the leaders are setting the good examples where, they're showing they can be respectful towards each other, can share, can have different theological beliefs, but still, have that respect and have that love, and that's what it's really all about.
Yeah, definitely. And that's similar to our latest project, which is the the Islamic International Educators Network, where we are bringing together school leaders, not so much principals and deputy principals, but actual whole school or school group leaders together from around the world. Malaysia, Pakistan, South Africa, Australia, the UK, Netherlands, the USA, and we're bringing them all together and it's great with these online meetings because it's so much easier to do. The Americans find it difficult because I think it's about 5 o'clock in the morning in Detroit, which is where they log in from. But for us here in Melbourne, it's 9 o'clock. For Malaysia, it's 7 o'clock at night. And we bring all of these people together just to talk about some of the common issues and share things that might help. So obviously during the COVID crisis, that's been really, really helpful. But our next project is definitely focused on looking at what is an Islamic education pedagogy. What does that actually mean? Not to try and get some 5 bullet points that every single person agrees on and then has to follow. I think that's too restrictive. But it's about that discussion about what does Islamic education really look like? And the key point really for Islamic education is this idea of holistic education. In the West, we have gone towards a system where things are really secular. You know, you study geography, history, maths, English, as if all of these things are completely separate subjects. And the best education shows the connections between those subjects. And that's Islamic because everything falls underneath Allah. There is one knowledge, one world, and everything is interconnected with that oneness of Allah. And so that's the real project for this International Islamic Education Network, is to start looking at how can we get this holistic nature of Islam into a holistic nature of true education. How can we get away from what the Western education system has forced us towards, which is this real separation of education, specialism with students when they're far too young, you know, making sure that students actually understand how things are interconnected within our world, within our universe. And that's not just, you know, scientific knowledge, that's spiritual understanding, that's artistic understanding, all of those things. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Really looking forward to how that all expresses and how that all goes in the near future. It's going to be really interesting.
It's a project.
That's all right.
It'll take a while.
Time is your best friend. That's fine. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Sulaiman. Really appreciate your time. May the peace, mercy, and blessings of God be with all of you listening. And I hope you all have a lovely day.
Jazakallah.